What's going on? Usually when I'm going live, I'm doing a podcast, but so I guess this is a solo cast tonight, and it's like 10 o'clock at night, so we'll see if anybody actually hops on. But I wanted to talk about a topic that I'm actually really passionate about, and I think is super cool. Um, yeah, so let's actually just dive right into it. I jotted down a few notes here so I remember, make sure that I don't forget anything, and so. Um, Really, actually, what I want to talk about tonight is how our amazing brain builds habits, builds skills, and how we can use that to create positive transformation in our life. And so, I think there's this word called neuroplasticity. Maybe you've heard this word. It's a bit of a buzzword that's floating around or has been for like a number of years. But it's like, is there a way to go beyond just talking about it? I go, well, this is this really cool thing that our brain can do. And it's like, how can we tap into this, like actually deliberately steer this or direct this amazing ability of our brain to create change that actually sticks? Because I think most people that I've encountered at some point in time have tried to create change in their life. So they've tried to, maybe they've tried to lose weight, they've tried to get healthy, they've tried to get fit, maybe even learn a new skill. They've tried to create change in their life. But what they discover is that it's incredibly difficult to really create change that sticks. And really, that's not a knock on the individual. But what it is it highlights that the way that we go about trying to create change is what needs to change. And so maybe we could say that, like, if you ever doubt your ability to change, or maybe you feel stuck in your old ways, or you wonder if this is too late, I want to share this with you. And it might surprise you, it might amaze you, but I want to show you how you can tap into this. So not just talk about this cool idea called neuroplasticity that their brain can do, but actually how do you use it? How do you tap into it and steer it instead of just kind of passively letting it happen to actually create change that sticks? Because really, actually, at any age you can create change, but it's if we do it the old way, that's where we only create change for a few months and kind of fall back into old habits. So I want to show you how you can actually create change that sticks, and it doesn't require superhuman effort to do so. And what I think is really cool is, I think about our brain kind of like a computer, but really our brain is actually like a computer that can grow new circuits. That's pretty crazy to think about. We take our brain for granted. Our brain's amazing. It runs 24 hours a day, right? We've got this amazing brain that runs 24 hours a day, and we kind of just take it for granted because it's always there until it doesn't like function the way that we want it to. And so that's why I've really dove into this, partly even because of my own struggles and the things that I've dealt with and overcome in my own life that led me down the path of trying to figure this stuff out. So I want to share a picture with you, because I think when we create pictures or use pictures or analogies or metaphors, it helps us to understand a more complex concept and make it sort of simple. Um, So if you think about settlers arriving at this new undiscovered land, and whenever I hear that, I think of like Settlers of Catan, right? But imagine these settlers; they arrive at this new undiscovered land, and the first time that they have to go across this land, it would be slow because they don't know the best way. They don't really know anything about it. They might encounter valleys, mountains, forests, deserts, and so on. So there's all these things that they don't know are waiting for them. They might encounter, and they'd have to stop. They'd have to look around, think about what the best way might be. But as they go back and forth, they actually start to learn where the shortcuts are and where the fastest routes are. And the more times they cross back and forth, the smoother and the easier this trip would become. And then let's say once they figure out the best path to take to go across this place, they could actually pave roads and even make highways. And then once these highways are paved and the roads are now permanent, they can zip back and forth easily. And that's kind of a way to describe what happens in our brain when we try to learn a new skill, to build a habit or things like that. So, to illustrate this a little bit further, why I think is really powerful to understand how this idea of neuroplasticity works, because it sounds like a big word that I'm like, oh my gosh, and it's 10 o'clock at night. But a researcher studied two groups of students. Group one, they taught about neuroplasticity. So we're going to teach you how the brain learns. And group two, they didn't teach them anything about this. And they studied these two groups of students for 2 years. So the first group that learned about how the brain learns, so they started to understand this is how the brain actually works. They got significantly better results than people who didn't understand how their brain works. And so if you can learn this, if you understand this, you're much less likely to get discouraged in the process of trying to create change. So those who learned how the brain works, they perform significantly better over time because when we know, not just know, but we know how, our brain has the ability to change and reorganize itself. Whenever we make mistakes, whenever we start to struggle, whenever we hit a roadblock, we don't give up because we know that our brain has the ability to adapt, to learn, and to grow. So let me paint another picture for you. I'm going to adjust my seat a little bit here. Uh, Imagine you had to cross a field. And this field is covered with overgrown grass, like really tall grass, maybe as tall as you are. And you got to go cross over this field to get to the other side. Now, the first time you go to walk across it, there's a lot of resistance because you're kind of pushing all the grass out of the way. You can't really see very far ahead because there's all this really tall grass. So you're trying to go through it. But each time you cross, the grass starts to get a little bit flatter, a little bit more pressed down. Maybe even the path starts to get a little bit wider. Now, let's take this one step further and say, so imagine you've kind of created this path across this field, but one day you fell into a hole. Would you stay in that hole? No, I'm pretty sure you would get up, you would make a note of where that was, and you'd walk around it next time. And so that's kind of like adapting what we do when we encounter difficulties. And that's why it can actually be really helpful if things don't necessarily go according to plan. I think when we embark on this road of change or transformation, we go on this journey, maybe there's this idea that everything's just going to fall into place and go according to plan. But what we know is that life never goes according to plan. But if we know that when this happens, that our brain has the ability to sort of rewire and wire around this stuff, this actually helps us learn. So if we go back to our analogy of going across in the field, if we discover there's a hole in the field, in the path that we've just made across this field, we learn how to walk around it, right? And that's like our brain's ability to, there's this word called iterate. It's one that I don't think we use this word a lot, but it means to tweak or to adjust. And what we look at is those who are successful at creating change. If they have the ability to tweak or adjust what they're doing whenever they encounter some kind of resistance or obstacle, they're much more likely to succeed than those who say, I've encountered an obstacle, that's it, I'm out. So when you find something that's not working for you and you make an adjustment, you change what you're doing slightly, and then you can keep going. This is, excuse me, this means you're much more likely to be successful. So just to think about our brain for a sec, I want to share something really amazing about our brain, or at least I find it to be amazing. So our brain is made up of millions of cells, and we call these cells neurons. And there's actually as many neurons in your brain as there are stars in the Milky Way. Both of those are kind of unfathomable, like just billions. Like I can't even picture that number, but that's how incredible. But our brain actually produces enough electricity to power a light bulb, which maybe this is why in cartoons and comics, when somebody has an idea, they show like the light bulb above their head. But actually, so it's this electricity that creates connections between neurons. And so, now I want to talk a little bit more about this, idea of neuroplasticity, because if we understand how this works, we can then understand um, how to make it work for us instead of being passive about it. Because if we don't understand how this works, this process ends up being passive and can even work against us, right? It's not a one-way street. This is a two-way street. So like one thing is, if you're not in the mood to learn, your brain will actually switch off neuroplasticity. So if you're distracted, if you're disengaged, if you're just kind of going through the motions mindlessly and not really interested in what it is you're doing, your brain will switch that off. And then any changes that you make are actually just temporary. Those changes don't stick because your brain doesn't see it as important. And so it's kind of like we go back to this analogy of walking through that grassy field. The first few times you walk back and forth, the grass kind of just bounces back up. So a behavior needs to be repeated in order for the change to stick. Now, here's where we take it to kind of the next level and get things and make things even a little bit more interesting. We can create change by imagining things or by visualizing things in our brain. We could call this kind of like mental rehearsal. And maybe as a kid, this is something you did. If you ever played sports, maybe you would picture like hitting the game-winning shot or scoring the game-winning goal or something like that. We can call that mental rehearsal, which can actually drive change in the brain as well. So I want to share with you a study that like this blew my mind when I heard this. So in this study, they compared two groups of people. So group one physically practiced some finger strengthening exercises. And I could just imagine, I'm like, finger strengthening exercises. Could you imagine that as like an exercise class? Maybe pick someone like Richard Simmons, or I don't know. That was just the first name exercise icon that I thought about. But like, now we're going to do reps with like our index finger here, but anyways, so they practiced physically doing finger strengthening exercises. Now, group two, the other group, all they did was imagine they were doing these exercises. Like they sat in a chair, they laid down, they just imagined or pictured they were doing these exercises. So group one, the one that actually physically did the action, their strength went up by 30%. Group two, the group that just visualized in their head carrying out these actions, saw their strength increase by 22%. So that's like 80% of the results they got just by visualizing doing something like this. That's pretty incredible when we stop and think about that. I think it's also important to know that this can be a two-way street. So if we, for example, tell ourselves something like really unhelpful, and we tell ourselves that repeatedly, we can actually move neuroplasticity in the wrong direction. So if every day you wake up and say like I'm a loser, I'm never going to do this, I'm a failure, I always get it wrong, this sucks and so on, we can actually steer neuroplasticity in the wrong direction. So the way that we talk about ourselves really matters as well. Now, we can also say that this neuroplasticity is also a use it or lose it type of process. In other words, if we don't continue to practice the skills and habits enough times before they form, the habit won't really stick. So, for example, when I was a kid, I went to piano lessons and I actually went for about 6 years. And I got pretty good at piano after 6 years, but then I never really continued with that practice. So eventually my brain prunes that stuff away, cuts that stuff away and says, we don't need to remember how to do this anymore because you're not practicing it. And so when you think about this, when you're trying to create change that sticks, you want it to be very, very repeatable, simple enough that you can repeat on a regular basis. And then what we can do to really strengthen it further is this ability to make adjustments when things don't go according to plan. And so there's another really cool part about our brain learning skills, this neuroplasticity, called transference. And that is when you develop a skill, you learn something that can be used in other areas. For example, if I learned how to speak another language, let's say in Canada, we have English and French as our official languages. If I learned how to speak French, it would become easier to learn a third language than it was to learn a second language because there's certain skills around learning a language that get transferred over when I try to do this a third time. And so there's this idea that when we try to create lifestyle change, we can think about what we're really doing here is we're creating new skills. We're developing new skills. And so that means that as there's kind of like this cumulative effect, we start with one and then we build another one and then we build another one. It gets easier as time goes on because these skills are transferable. Now, there's something else that's really important to understand about this idea of neuroplasticity, and that is that meaning matters. In other words, it's really important for us to have a good idea why we want to accomplish change. What we're doing here is if we can connect an emotion to this change we're trying to create, we signal to our brain, this is important to me. So if we can connect a sense of meaning and purpose to habits or skills that we're trying to develop, this says to your brain, this is important. Pay attention to this, right? So they're more likely to stick. And I call this like an emotionally compelling reason. So, because very often, let's say developing a skill, a habit, a behavior, a lifestyle, whatever, often it's really unglamorous. It's not super exciting in the day to day. And because really repetition isn't super exciting, but it's what's necessary now. But if we can attach a sense of meaning to whatever it is we're trying to build or develop, let's say, for example, Michael Jordan, a famous basketball player from years past, he would have shot, I don't know, hundreds or thousands of shots, probably hundreds of shots almost every day. Why? And it's not exciting, doing shots like that in the gym kind of by yourself. But what you're actually trying to do, why he was willing to do that and put that time in is because he wanted to be a champion, right? So every shot he took had a bigger purpose, a sense of meaning attached to it. And so if we can find like our emotionally compelling reason, we can give our brain like an important push that says this matters, pay attention. So now we've kind of talked about neuroplasticity itself, but now it's like, is there a way that we can actually steer it, direct it, and use it for us? Like instead of just passively letting it happen, because neuroplasticity is going to happen anyways. Our brain already knows what to do. That's the amazing thing, right? So when we hear like this word neuroplasticity, it sounds like, oh my gosh, it's this big technical sort of scientific term that's way above me, But the way our brain works, it's fascinating, could be a little bit overwhelming, but your brain already knows what to do. So all we have to do, so if our brain already knows what to do, excuse me, I get really excited when I talk about this. If our brain already knows what to do, We then only have to influence it with our inputs. And so I actually have four things that I want to share with you, four ways that you can steer or direct or facilitate neuroplasticity in your brain to really truly create change that sticks. Because isn't that the goal? I've not met like a single person who like embarked on an effort to create change. Let's say I want to lose weight or I want to get healthier, I want to get fitter. I've never met a person who says like I only want to lose weight for a couple of months. No, we actually want to lose weight for good. We want this change to stick. And so it's like if you can understand how this works, you can really truly create change that sticks. So number one is actually visualization. So earlier I talked about mental rehearsal, this visualizing or creating a picture in your mind of what you'd like to accomplish. That tells your brain something's important and steers your brain towards it. And remember, there was that study where people only visualized doing exercises and they physically developed more strength because they visualized doing it. The second one is our inner dialogue. So becoming aware of how we speak to ourselves in our mind. So again, our inner dialogue, which is kind of similar to this idea of mental rehearsal, the way that we talk to ourselves has the ability to influence our brain growth. And remember, inner dialogue is a two-way street. So it can influence in one direction or another. So if it's negative, it will steer our brain in a negative direction. If it's positive, it will steer our brain in a positive direction. Now, I do think it's important to say there's a bit of a caveat here, and that is like just like the finger strengthening exercises, those who physically did the exercise got stronger than those who just pictured it. So really, we still have to physically do something. But the other part of it is like our self talk and things we visualize do have to have a degree of being grounded in reality. So, for example, no amount of self talk and visualization will get me to the place where I'm going to be a PGA professional, like a professional golfer. I'm 40 years old. I'm past my athletic peak by probably about 10 years. That doesn't mean I'm totally over the hill, but in the realm of trying to become a professional golfer, yeah, I'm way past my physical prime. So no amount of self-talk, no amount of inner dialogue and visualization would sort of develop me into a professional level golfer. So these things, in order to work for us, do need to be kind of grounded in reality. So number three was this idea of journaling. So that's when we actually put our thoughts on paper. So what's really powerful about this is it helps us to get clarity. Our brain is really scattered, kind of like the hamster wheel. Things are going round and round and round. I got to focus on this and that and the next thing. I don't know what to focus on. When we start to put it on paper, we say to our brain, now it's on paper. I don't need you to remember this. And so when we can clear our mind of stress and worry and feeling overwhelmed, it actually means that our brain can better facilitates this process of neuroplasticity. And number four is like my favorite one. It's cliche. We've heard it talked about a lot in the last few years in the realm of personal development, but that is gratitude. Pardon me. Gratitude rewires our brain to be stronger and healthier and actually has a spillover effect, not just on our emotional health, our mental health, and also our physical health. Because when we practice gratitude, what we're actually doing is we are teaching our brain to look for positive things. Now, again, I think for gratitude to be powerful, it doesn't have to be, in fact, it could even be detrimental if we try to make it like this big sort of esoteric kind of fluffy sort of thing. Like find very simple things to be grateful for, small things to be grateful for. Teach your brain to look around and see how many different positive things you have to be grateful for. Because our brain actually has an inbuilt negativity bias. It's a survival mechanism, right? Our brain is wired to look for negative things to help us find identify threats. So to keep us safe. So knowing that that's our brain's tendency, when we teach our brain to look for positive things, it's actually a skill. So gratitude is a skill. So we teach our brain to look for positive things, and that helps to reshape our brain or steer our brain in a positive way. So really, as we wrap up, what I really want to sort of I guess impress upon you is like first of all, your brain is amazing. No matter where you're at, your brain is incredible, right? It can create change. And it does it through this process called neuroplasticity. That's your brain's ability to rewire itself. You don't have to teach your brain how to do this. Your brain already knows how to do this. But if you know that this is how your brain learns, this is how your brain grows, and you go, okay, how do I work with this? Knowing this happens, how do I intentionally steer my brain versus let it passively happen? Knowing how to steer that means you really can powerfully create positive change at any stage in life. So thank you so much. I hope you've enjoyed this. I hope you find it powerful. I really hope I mean, look, I love this topic. Clearly you can see from my passion, like sharing and waving my arms and telling you about it, but I really want you to be inspired as well, where you see this is possible. But in order to really truly create change that sticks, we need to do it in maybe a way that's a little bit different than we've looked at it before. So I hope this encourages you and really inspires you. You can create positive change. It is possible. And when you know this stuff, you can now intentionally make this happen as opposed to sort of let it passively pass you by. So awesome. Thanks so much for tuning in and have a great night.